No, the fact is that there's something happening. There's a mood in the air. There's a sense that the way we've been doing business for the last couple of decades has to change. That we are at a crossroads in this nation's history. That we're at a crossroads internationally, and we're at a crossroads domestically. There's a sense that we have a government that is no longer responding to ordinary people. That it's become an insider's game. That it's all about slash and burn and negative politics and deal making, but that it is not expressing the basic values and ideals that we hold as Americans, and as a consequence, it's not solving the challenges that we face all across the country. We know what those challenges are. We've been talking about those challenges year after year. We all know that we spend more money on health care than every nation on earth. $1.9 trillion a year. And despite that, we've got 46 million people uninsured. Despite that, families who have health insurance are seeing their co-payments and deductibles and premiums going up. Despite that fact, we know that small businesses can't afford to provide health insurance to their employees, and that large businesses can no longer compete internationally because they're burdened with health care costs that their competitors are not. It's not as if we couldn't solve this problem. We know that if we provided preventive care, that a child could get treated for asthma instead of having to go to an emergency room, and that would save us money. We know that if there's a diabetic and we paid $150 for a caseworker to work with them to make sure they got treatments, that we wouldn't have to spend that $30,000 on an amputation. We know that if we ended up putting money into technology for eliminating bureaucracy and administration, we could save all that money and put it into providing health insurance for every single American. And so what's been lacking is not technical solution. What's been lacking is the political will. We understand that we face an education crisis in this country, that our children are going to be competing in a global economy, and that they're going to need the skills of math and science. They're going to need to go to college and beyond. And yet, despite that knowledge, we end up having a situation in which there's no early childhood education for all the children who need it. We have teachers who are underpaid, students who are under-inspired, schools that have where the rats outnumber computers.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are here in Los Angeles, California, and you have just heard history. A true, bona fide, serious candidate to become the President of the United States. You've heard an inspirational speech by an inspirational young man. I've always predicted that a young man would come along one day that will lead us to the future of this great nation.
And we are so inspired to have a president that we can all be proud of. You can have it to be black. And we're here to celebrate today.
Obama, Obama, Obama.
Know what to do on that. We could put money into early education. We could put money to pay more teachers. We could create more flexibility in the classroom. We can ensure that every child who is qualified can go to college. There is no reason that we can't do that. What's missing is a sense of urgency, because we distance ourselves from those children who are left behind. We say we're not going to leave any child behind, but then we leave the money behind for No Child Left Behind. We know what could work if we decided that every child was our child and that we have a commitment to all of them. We understand that we face an energy challenge. That every time that Saudi Arabia decides to turn off the spigot, everybody here ends up paying a tax at the pump. But not only that, we send $800 million a year to some of the most hostile nations on earth. We fund both sides of the war on terrorism. And in the bargain, at the same time as the oil executives are getting record bonuses, we have a situation in which the polar ice caps are melting, and we may be seeing the slow deterioration of our climate. Now, we know what we could do with that. There's no reason why we could not create an entire industry around alternative fuels. There's no reason why we couldn't put people to work making buildings and businesses more fuel energy efficient. We could gather up all the young men in this community who are unemployed, and we could train them to insulate homes and work in that industry. What's lacking is the consensus and leadership to bring people together. And most of all, we see a war that should have never been authorized and should have never been waged. A war that after $500 billion and over 3,000 of our bravest young men and women lost, we actually find ourselves less safe than we were before. Our standing in the world diminished. Now, we know that unless we match the might of our military to the strength of our diplomacy and the power of our alliances, that we will never be safe. That we need to hunt down terrorists, but we also need to make sure that the billions of people who are struggling around the world, that they look to America and our ideals and our values and say to themselves that we are their partners in progress, and that we care about human rights, and that we care about genocide in Darfur. And if we do those things, that in fact we can create the kind of world that is inhospitable to terrorism. Our failure is a failure of imagination. And so, given all these things, the question is, what are we going to do about it? What can we do about it? And the reason that I decided to announce for the presidency is not because I'm in a hurry. My life is good right now, and as it is, I don't see my children enough. This is no bargain for my family. But when I sat down with my wife to really think about this, we asked ourselves, are we in a moment right now where potentially we can not just win an election, but we can transform a country? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes, we can transform the country right here and right now. We've got a window to make a change, and we've got to seize that opportunity. Now, I think that when you listen to the pundits and the commentators, most of them will tell you, you know, Obama, he's saying some interesting things, and he can give a pretty good speech. And he's got enormous potential, but let's face it, he's only been on the national scene for a few years, and we need him to wait. We need him to hold on. And let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. It's true that I've only been in Washington for a little while, but I've been in Washington long enough to know it needs to change. I know that. And so the question then becomes, what's it going to take to change this country? You know, I wrote a book. I wrote a book called The Audacity of Hope. Not just with words, but with deeds. And I loved that idea. I loved that idea in my own life, because what it told me was that I could be hopeful and optimistic, but not ignore problems. Rather, I would face them down. I would look at poverty, and I'd look at racism, and I'd look at sexism. And I'd look those things squarely in the face, but I wouldn't lose heart. I would say we can change those things if, as a community, we come together and make a determination that we want to change.
This is just one step in the journey, ladies and gentlemen, of this great young man. I mean, not just because he has pigmentation of his skin, it's because he exudes that energy and that excitement that it kind of reminds me of a younger JFK. The excitement that he generates within the crowd, the energy. He has some very good points. There are so many points that I'd like to discuss with him from a medical standpoint. See you next time.